The crowd at Buckingham Palace fell into a stunned silence. In that frozen moment, Marcus "Thunder" Thompson's foot connected with the royal guard's face, sending the bearskin cap flying through the morning air. What happened next would shatter everything the world champion thought he knew about real combat. "I'll show you why these guards are obsolete," he had boasted moments earlier. He couldn't have been more wrong. Drop a comment below, what would you do in the guard's position? Marcus "Thunder" Thompson wasn't just another martial arts champion. At 32, he had built an empire of success that most fighters only dreamed of. Three-time international champion, owner of 5 elite dojos across California, and a social media phenomenon with millions of followers hanging on his every post. His Instagram bio said it all: undefeated, untouchable, unstoppable. Each word backed by countless tournament victories and a string of knocked-out opponents who had dared to challenge his supremacy in the ring. The designer watches, the custom sports cars, the celebrity students, they were all testaments to his meteoric rise from a local gym instructor to a global martial arts sensation. His signature lightning-fast kicks had become YouTube highlights, studied and imitated by aspiring fighters worldwide. Today, Thompson stood outside Buckingham Palace with his elite team, 4 top-ranked fighters who served as both his training partners and devoted followers. Each wore matching black tracksuits emblazoned with the Thunder Combat System logo, a brand that had become synonymous with modern martial arts excellence. Remember Dubai last month? Derek "Tank" Wilson, his head trainer, grinned. That European champion lasted what, 30 seconds? Sean "Cobra" O'Connor, Thompson's sparring partner, chuckled. 28. I timed it. Dawn light painted Buckingham Palace in shades of gold, as tourists gathered with cameras ready to capture the iconic changing of the guard. The morning air carried a crisp autumn chill, mixing with the excited whispers of visitors from around the world. James "Steele" Crawford stood motionless at his post, his scarlet tunic and bearskin cap a stark contrast against the palace's weathered stone. At 28, he cut an impressive figure, ramrod straight, eyes fixed forward, every inch the picture of military precision. What the tourists photographing him didn't know was that beneath that ceremonial uniform stood a decorated Special Forces veteran, with 3 tours in Afghanistan and classified operations that would never appear in any public record. Among the gathering crowd, Colonel Richard Blackwood paused in his morning walk. After 30 years in the Royal Marines, he could read military bearing like others read newspapers. His weathered face registered subtle concern as he observed Thompson's group, recognizing the telltale signs of impending trouble. "Look at that stance," Thompson's voice carried across the courtyard, professional assessment mixing with derision. "Completely vulnerable. No center of gravity. All that ceremonial garbage would get him killed in a real fight." The colonel's hand tightened imperceptibly on his walking stick. He'd seen that guard's personnel file, the combat medals, the commendations, the operations that remained heavily redacted even at his clearance level. Professional fighters versus ceremonial soldiers? Thompson announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of a seminar instructor. "Let me show you the difference." His entourage formed a loose semicircle, their matching black tracksuits creating a makeshift arena in front of the palace gates. A German family quietly ushered their children away. An elderly woman with a veteran's pin on her coat shook her head in disapproval. But others gathered closer, phones raised, sensing the promise of viral content. See, in real combat, Thompson demonstrated a series of rapid strikes that stopped inches from the air around Crawford. Every movement has purpose, intent, lethal potential. His footwork was undeniably impressive, each step calculated and precise. This guard here? He's been trained to suppress those instincts. To stand still. To be a tourist attraction. Colonel Blackwood had begun making his way through the crowd, but Thompson's team smoothly intercepted, creating a human barrier. Let the demonstration finish, old-timer. Derek "Tank" Wilson smiled, his muscled frame blocking the colonel's path. Educational purposes only. That guard is not what you think, Blackwood warned quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Your friend is making a serious mistake. Thompson continued his performance, circling Crawford like a predator. In my dojos, we teach reality. No rules. No ceremony. He executed a spinning kick that whistled past Crawford's ear, close enough to disturb the air. Notice he doesn't even blink? That's not discipline, that's programming. The crowd had grown larger, their collective tension building with each of Thompson's increasingly aggressive movements. Some filmed eagerly, while others watched with growing concern. A palace security guard spoke urgently into his radio, but remained at his post, bound by protocols. Ladies and gentlemen, Thompson projected his voice like a ringside announcer, I'm about to show you why static defense, the kind these guards represent, is fundamentally obsolete in modern combat. Crawford remained motionless, but Colonel Blackwood noticed the subtle shift in his breathing pattern, a change only a veteran would recognize. The calm before the storm. Final demonstration time. Thompson announced, rolling his shoulders. His movements had taken on the fluid precision of a fighter entering competition mode. I'll show you what happens when ceremony meets reality. The morning sun caught the edge of Crawford's brass buttons as Thompson began his approach. The martial artist's footwork was masterful. A complex pattern of steps developed through thousands of hours of tournament competition. Watch closely, Thompson called out to his growing audience. This is why traditional military training fails against modern combat techniques. His body coiled like a spring, each muscle perfectly tensed for explosive action. What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Thompson launched into a championship-caliber combination, a feint, a step through, and finally, a devastating spinning heel kick aimed directly at Crawford's face. The impact was audible, a sharp crack that cut through the morning air like a gunshot. The bearskin cap flew in a perfect arc against the blue London sky. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The crowd stood frozen, phones still recording, as the cap completed its journey and landed with a soft thud on the courtyard stones. Thompson landed in a perfect fighting stance, a triumphant smile beginning to form on his lips. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why. His words died in his throat. Crawford hadn't fallen. Hadn't staggered. Hadn't even stepped back. A thin line of blood traced its way down from his temple, but his eyes, now locked directly onto Thompson's for the first time, showed neither pain nor fear. Only a cold, focused clarity that experienced combatants would recognize instantly. Oh shit, Derek "Tank" Wilson whispered, his earlier bravado evaporating. Then Crawford moved. It wasn't the clumsy response of a ceremonial soldier. It was the precise, economical motion of a predator who had stalked targets through mountain passes and urban warfare zones. His ceremonial rifle clattered to the stones as he closed the distance between himself and Thompson with a speed that defied his formal attire. Thompson, to his credit, recognized the danger instantly. His tournament-trained reflexes snapped into action as he threw up a textbook defense. But Crawford's first strike broke through it like it wasn't there, a perfectly executed combat technique that had nothing to do with scoring points and everything to do with ending threats. The martial arts champion staggered back, his eyes wide with the sudden, humbling realization that he was drastically outmatched. Every counter he attempted was met with brutal efficiency, each of his tournament-winning techniques nullified by responses honed in environments where second place meant something very different than a silver medal. In less than 5 seconds, Thompson found himself on the ground, his arm locked in a hold that teetered on the edge of structural failure. Crawford's knee was precisely positioned on his sternum, enough pressure to immobilize, but not injure. Stay down, Crawford spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the quiet authority of command rather than the anger of someone who'd been assaulted. "This ends now." Colonel Blackwood stepped forward, the crowd parting before his military bearing. "I believe," he addressed Thompson with clinical precision, "you've just received a practical education in the difference between performing combat and experiencing it." Thompson struggled ineffectively against Crawford's hold. "What the hell?" "Guard Crawford," Blackwood continued, his tone conversational yet edged with steel, "served with a special reconnaissance regiment before his assignment to the Queen's Guard. For combat deployments. 2 distinguished service commendations." He paused, allowing the information to sink in. "The ceremonial duties you've been mocking require the highest levels of discipline from soldiers who've already proven themselves in actual combat." Palace security personnel were approaching rapidly across the courtyard, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The crowd had reformed at a safer distance, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "SRR," one of Thompson's training partners whispered, his face pale. "Those guys are..." "Quite right," Blackwood finished for him. "Every guard standing ceremonial duty is an active duty soldier with extensive combat training. The discipline you mistook for weakness, Mr. Thompson, is the same discipline that keeps them effective in situations where your tournament training would prove fatally inadequate." Thompson had stopped struggling, a new awareness dawning in his eyes. He moved like, "I didn't expect." "No, you wouldn't have," Blackwood nodded. "Competition fighting and combat operations develop entirely different skill sets. Your techniques are impressive in controlled environments with rules and referees. Guard Crawfords are effective in environments where the consequences of failure aren't measured in lost points." The security commander approached Blackwood with respectful recognition. "Colonel, sir. We'll take it from here. I believe Guard Crawford has the situation well in hand," Lieutenant, Blackwood replied. "Mr. Thompson here decided to test the reflexes of the Queen's Guard in a rather direct fashion." The security officer's expression hardened as he took in the scene, the fallen bearskin cap, the blood on Crawford's temple, the martial arts champion pinned to the ground. "That's a serious offense, sir." Later that afternoon, in a secure room within the palace grounds, Thompson sat across from Crawford, now in his standard combat uniform rather than ceremonial dress. The cut on Crawford's temple had been cleaned and bandaged, though his composed demeanor remained unchanged. "I'd like to apologize," Thompson began, his championship confidence replaced by genuine humility. "Not just for the kick, but for everything before that. The disrespect, the showboating. I completely misjudged what I was looking at." Crawford studied him for a moment, his assessment as precise as his earlier combat response. "Most civilians do," he replied evenly. "That's partly by design." "The stillness," Thompson said, leaning forward. "I thought it was just ceremony, just tradition. But it's actually about control, isn't it?" Crawford nodded slightly. "The same discipline that lets us stand motionless for hours allows us to make split-second decisions under fire. Different application, same principle. In competition," Thompson reflected, "everything I do is designed to be seen. To score points. To impress judges." He gestured at Crawford. "But what you did, there was nothing showy about it. Just pure efficiency." "Combat isn't about winning medals," Crawford stated simply. "It's about completing objectives and staying alive. Style points don't count for much when lives are at stake." Thompson rubbed his shoulder, where Crawford's joint lock had left a reminder of the morning's lesson. "The way you moved. I've trained with Special Forces guys from 3 different countries. Never seen anything quite like that." "SRR training adapts to operational requirements," Crawford replied, neither confirming nor denying specifics. "What works in a tournament ring isn't always what works in the field." "They're going to make an example of me, aren't they?" Thompson asked, glancing at the door where security waited. Assaulting a guard on duty is taken very seriously, Crawford confirmed without emotion. The Crown doesn't look kindly on it. Thompson nodded, accepting the consequences with unexpected grace. Fair enough. I earned whatever comes next. He straightened in his chair. For what it's worth, I've learned more about real combat in 5 seconds with you than in 15 years of tournament fighting. Crawford studied him for a moment longer, then offered a professional nod of acknowledgement. As he stood to leave, Thompson spoke again. One last question: when I kicked you, most men would have gone down, or at least staggered. You barely moved. How? Crawford paused at the door, the ghost of a smile touching his lips for the first time. When you've had real IEDs detonate nearby, a kick to the face is just another Tuesday. The next morning, Guard Crawford stood at his post again, his bearskin cap restored, his uniform immaculate. No trace remained of the previous day's confrontation, but tourists who approached now did so with newfound respect, their cameras more discreet, their admiration more genuine. Among them was a young martial arts student who'd watched yesterday's viral videos. Sir, he addressed Colonel Blackwood, who happened to be passing by, is it true what they say about the guard? That he was special forces? Blackwood smiled slightly. What you're looking at, young man, is the result of a fundamental misunderstanding many people have about military excellence. These guards aren't statues who occasionally fight. They're warriors who've mastered the art of stillness. He gestured to Crawford's perfect posture. The discipline you see here, the ability to stand motionless for hours, to maintain composure under tourist harassment, that's not separate from their combat training. It's an extension of it. The same mental control that allows a soldier to remain still under public scrutiny is what keeps them alive under enemy fire. The young student looked at Crawford with new eyes, seeing beyond the ceremonial uniform to the warrior beneath. I always thought the ceremony was just for show. That's the beauty of it, Blackwood replied. The ceremony isn't a facade hiding their strength. It's a demonstration of it. What would you have done in Thompson's situation? Would you have seen past the ceremonial uniform to recognize the combat veteran beneath? Or would you, like many, have mistaken stillness for weakness? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new about the Royal Guards, and hit that subscribe button for more stories that reveal the truth behind ceremonial traditions. See you tomorrow with another powerful story that might just change how you see the world.